I am delighted to be here. Thank you all for joining. I'm particularly excited to be doing this with Vera because Vera and I have very, very different backgrounds. Let's jump right into this amazing space of AI where there's so much hype, but there's a ton of value being created as well. Vera, welcome. I'm thrilled to be doing this with you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Eleanor. Super excited to be here today and really share perspectives of what we're seeing in applying AI, especially in industries that are, in theory, not really technical, right? So everything from pharma and medical device all the way to, Alex's work at Hungryroot on the e-com side. So thank you, Alex. Excited to have this conversation with you.
This is going to be great. Our companies are in very different stages and in very different businesses. As Vera mentioned, Hungryroot personalized grocery delivery service, fairly late stage, $330 million in revenue last year. 2/3 of our revenue is directly driven by AI. That is, we get to know our customers and we then put groceries and recipes into their boxes that we know they're going to like. And then 2/3 of what we sell are these things that we recommend to those customers. So pretty AI centric. Vera, how about your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So AI and data is literally at the core of what we do with pharma and med device companies. So we work closely with what are called medical affairs teams within pharma and medical device to help them analyze a lot of their data, be it publications, Congress abstracts, field CRM notes, et cetera, to help them really extract insights, understand the patient care gaps, and be able to address them. And AI, whether it's GenAI or your standard AI techniques, so to speak, we've had for decades, are very much applicable here. So AI is literally at the core of our value delivery. So I am super excited to share more about that and also learn from food and bev.
Oh my God, Vera, I am delighted to find out how in the world you were able to bring the amazing new tech to an industry that historically is not really an early adopter. And I'm just so curious how they're taking this in and where the hype is and where the real use cases are. So let's jump right in. But honestly, maybe we begin by acknowledging the hype. Both of these charts are from The Economist, and on the left is kind of the stock charts of companies that are close to tech and companies that are not. And you can see this major divergence from the launch of ChatGPT. And if you look at the number of mentions of AI from that moment on, it explodes. And one might argue that there's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy here. If investors are rewarding mentions of AI, more and more companies will be talking about it. So there's so much talk about how AI is transforming all of these tech businesses. But then on the right, if you actually ask the leaders across different industries, even in information technology, the space where theoretically AI should be front and center, we are talking about 15, maybe 20% of companies that are actually using it in any aspect of their value creation process. And if you go further into healthcare, administration, retail, we are talking about single digits. So the hype makes it seem that everybody is using AI, while in reality, we are in very much early innings. And today, I'm delighted to kind of jump into some of these use cases that we've been able to see across these two really different industries to truly create value. Hype be damned.
I love that, Alex. And to add to that, I think what's been really interesting to kind of observe, especially in life sciences, when it comes to this kind of hype premium. And I feel like the silver lining of the hype, especially in a regulated industry that, to your point, tends to be a later adopter when it comes to a lot of novel technology. There is a lot of talk about Gen AI in particular when it comes to pharma and med device. Every trade show you go to, it's basically what you hear. There's at least one, if not more, talks on the topic. But there is this gap in terms of actually implementing it. But I think the hype, in a way, for pharma is driving their initiative to want to adopt a novel technology and figure out how to integrate it and create value quickly. Whereas typically in the past, with other digital type of cycles in pharma and life sciences, it's taken a long time for them to actually feel comfortable adopting. And this shift is different. And just one quick example on this is, if you all are familiar with the FDA, which regulates all the drugs and devices as well as food and beverage, I believe it was about maybe 8 years ago that they just started to digitize some of their submissions. 8 years ago, it used to be pen and paper. You would have to physically submit it to the FDA. Just 8 years ago, they digitized. So the fact that there was even discussion on Gen AI in pharma and life sciences, and people actually are looking to implement it now, not 8 years from now, is really the silver lining and is exciting. But you still
Oh
have to
my
look
God,
beyond
that's
the hype.
amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. 8 years ago, pen and paper. Wow. Um, wow. And the dot-com boom was what, 16 years before then, and 20 years before then, the first adopters actually started doing digital things. Incredible. I guess this creates a responsibility for all of us, the techies who have been playing with ChatGPT, who are interested in creating value from AI, to use the hype, use the interest to show value quickly. Because we know that the higher the hype, the bigger the bubble, the lower the trough of disillusionment. And that will eventually come unless we are able to show value. And that's really what we're about today, right? Let's maybe jump right in. We have some themes prepared for you, Vera and I, and we'll be jumping into those themes. But before we go there, here's what you can expect. One, don't be a hammer looking for a nail. Don't expect that every solution can be solved with AI. Two, this is a brand new kind of hammer that just came out, especially generative AI. And in order to be able to figure out what problem set to apply it to, you really need to understand it in depth. And three, it's so exciting to be thinking about technologies, but this one, just like many others, demands that we understand the customer problem first and customer pain first, and think about what a minimum desirable product is. Sometimes it's AI and sometimes it's not. Shall we jump right in?
Yes. And to add to that, Alex, as well, I think if anything, the core takeaway, no matter what technological shift is ever happening, is always, if you take away one thing, it's just, what is the problem that you're ultimately solving for the customer? And that is always at the forefront and center, no matter the hype that ends up happening around a technology, especially when it comes to AI.
Oh my God, plus one, plus one. Let's dig in and look at some of these problem spaces. Vera, I know you've been talking to a lot of folks who are interested in AI first and foremost, and that often is one of the reasons why they approach you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's kind of two things to highlight here. I think, like I mentioned previously, pharma and life sciences in general are very much excited about Gen AI, which is awesome because they're usually an industry that's heavily risk averse, very regulated, and are typically slow adopters for those reasons. I mean, they have patient lives in their hands. It's very critical that they get things right. What's been interesting to observe in this shift is that there is, for a product like Atrix, a lot of interest from pharma companies because it is leveraging the latest technology. But ultimately, what we've noticed, whether it's through our sales cycle or the product that we build for our customers, is that while Gen AI can be the hook to potentially get someone like foot in the door to have a conversation, ultimately the most successful kind of either sales cycles that end up converting or customers that end up retaining, everything is always tying to how do you bring that interest in Gen AI that they might have initially had, tying it to the actual core problem that they're trying to solve. So most of our sales discussions, for example, which would be relevant to marketing perhaps as well, they don't actually focus on Gen AI. The conversation always transitions to what is the problem that you're trying to address as a team. And then, hey, maybe conversation 2 or 3, we can touch base on Gen AI, and how that's involved in the process. But it's not ultimately what drives the customer to purchase. And in fact, I would argue if a customer is making a decision to use your product or make a purchase decision only because of Gen AI, it's probably not going to end up working out in the long term. Short term, you might have that customer. So for us, short term, we might get a customer for a year, but they're probably not going to convert after that year. And we would rather focus on the long-term value, which is problem-centric, than the short term of, hey, we're using these shiny objects like Gen AI to solve some of these problems. And I'm
No,
curious,
my
Alex.
God. Okay. Wow. That is okay. That's an insight. That's quite incredible, Vera. I mean, if a prospect is interested because of tech as opposed to their problem, they're probably not the right prospect. That's incredible. Wow.
And I'm curious too with with Hungryroot, because AI is at such a core of the product. Is AI something that you all use in marketing? Like, does that resonate with your customer base, or is the problem also potentially what resonates more?
This is actually quite funny because we've been experimenting exactly with that for quite a while. And you can imagine that being a company that has AI at the front and center, we would be talking about AI on our front page. But interestingly, if you go to hungry.com, you will see effectively no mentions of AI. And that is very much intentional. We've done a whole bunch of consumer research, and the customer does not want AI to be filling their grocery cart. They want a company that is understanding them, that is personalizing their shopping cart based upon what it knows about them. But the moment it becomes a robot filling their grocery shopping cart, it goes into the realm of, I don't really trust a robot. I don't want a robot to be doing this. So in some way, the image of AI and any mentions of AI are taking the trust away. And what we found, our best customer is a mom who's feeding her family with Hungryroot because she's super busy and overwhelmed, and Hungryroot helps save her a whole bunch of time and money. Um, that mom is looking for an easy way to eat healthy, not for an AI. So that's why our marketing is front and center about the problem that she has, not about how we solve this. And just happens to be that AI is a really effective way of doing that personalization. But that's not what gets the mom to buy.
And I would say, similar to that with an example with Atrix and on the farm and life sciences side, that same problem that a lot of our customers and teams are facing is really this problem of data analysis. I mean, imagine you have to go through 1,000 research papers or 1,000 CRM notes. I mean, that's such a time-consuming process today. It happens via spreadsheets. These folks are interested in thinking about strategically how to make a better impact on patients. That is where their skill set is most leveraged, not in spreadsheets trying to format things, right? So that's really the core pain with Atrix that we're solving. And it happens to be that GenAI is one part of being able to process data that creates efficiency that wasn't possible before with other type of standard AI models. But to Alex's point, what our end customer cares about is getting that problem solved and almost feeling that relief of a lot of that work being automated for them so they can focus on patients, regardless of what is being done, whether it's using AI or not. The other kind of interesting point I'll make where the use of GenAI in marketing or in sales can potentially actually backfire. And we'll talk about a framework of how to think about applying GenAI in a little bit. But in pharma, it's very regulated, right? So there's certain things where there will be a fear if you bring up automation via GenAI that it's going to cause a lot of trouble. All marketing materials that pharma companies put out have to be reviewed by medical, legal, regulatory. They're under scrutiny by the FDA, the DOJ. So if you had an AI, quote, automate a review of marketing materials, that can backfire from a marketing perspective because people are gonna be like, well, I don't know, is it gonna be 100% accurate? Should we really trust this AI to make such a high risk decision that could cost us tens of millions of dollars, if it messes up? So I just wanted to add that counter example to also showcase how marketing AI could actually backfire unintentionally if you don't understand your customers. So again, customers are key in understanding their pain points.
Very, in some way, I'm envious of this regulatory guardrail because in consumer, it's not as strong. And as such, you see all of these folks effectively riding the PR wave. When ChatGPT just came out, I don't know about you, but I've seen so many folks talk about how ChatGPT is amazing for meal planning and it can solve all of my problems. I'll just put in my dietary requirements and any sort of allergies I have, and it will plan all of my meals. It is an awesome demo and it PRs so well, but it actually does not solve the problem. It solves 75% of the problem, and the remaining 25% must be solved, and it's terrible at it. So a lot of folks attempted to ride this PR wave of ChatGPT for X, and it got them the attention, but not the customers. So in some way, Vera, I wonder if regulatory was there. Would those attempts be made or not?
I feel like if the same level of regulation was applied to non-life science industries, I feel like as a marketer, I would probably cry with the amount of evidence I would need to back all claims, including potentially snazzy, prototypes or PR campaigns that are being done today with tech like ChatGPT. But honestly, regulation can be a barrier to innovation. So I'm glad that the FDA, for example, does not regulate every industry.
Point taken. I guess you're touching upon another real interesting point with these prototypes, right? Like a big aspect here is just like companies love to talk about AI as a means of getting investors to get excited. Very similarly, so often I hear of folks thinking about how, like, hey, if I demonstrate this awesome AI prototype to this other team or to the senior leadership crew, will they then see me as an innovator? And what I've found again and again is if that's the only thing you do, if you're kind of riding the wave of the cool, exciting things, you actually will not create value. And yes, you will get noticed, but not for the right things. That is in some way making one snazzy prototype that demonstrates how far you can take a concept is really good. But if that's the only thing you're doing, if that's your mode of operation, and you're just excited that ChatGPT has come out so you can use that too, and blockchain was right before that, that's a recipe of getting fired, not getting promoted.
And I think all of this ultimately ties back to the one simple point, which is what is your customer pain point? What problem are you trying to solve? And just always, no matter what shiny objects are in front of you, keeping that in mind, whether you're trying to service customers or internally trying to push, an innovative experiment forward with GenAI, because it is innovative, but also at the same time, you just have to keep the problem in mind. Because in the short term, you could win. So, I mean, to your point, Alex, with, snazzy prototypes, it's like on the sales side, right? In the short term, someone can be hooked in because of GenAI, and we could close a contract probably just because of that. But in the long term, that customer is not going to retain. They might not want to work with us anymore in the future. So you have to think of that balance and not get too into how do you call it? Too caught up in the short term shiny object syndrome, so to speak.
Oh my God, yes, Vera. And I mean, I've seen this as a ailment of innovation groups in bigger companies. Just as one of the core reasons why they struggle to make progress, because they keep focusing on exactly this. But maybe other than just focusing on the pain, there's an extra aspect in here. And let's maybe examine that aspect, which is this hammer is new. And maybe we shouldn't apply it everywhere, but my God, there are some really cool use cases. I know you found an amazing sweet spot with Atrix. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of ties to, in the previous slide, we've been kind of discussing the hype, right? And focus on the customer pain point. And let's say you have identified the pain point, right? So then, and this is what we also coach a lot of pharma and med device companies on as well when we're having these types of discussions is once we've identified the pain point, now let's evaluate the different tools, right? And GenAI is this new tool to evaluate. And in which cases would GenAI actually be a valuable tool to solve the pain point? And there's probably like 2 or 3 like very broad buckets of kind of a framework, if you will, or criteria that make a problem a good, where GenAI is a good tool to potentially solve that problem. one, obviously, if it's to do with language, right? That's a fairly obvious one. But I think the one case that we encounter in pharma that also is applicable in other industries is this concept of risk tolerance. So as I mentioned earlier, pharma is very regulated, right? And a lot of pharma marketing teams and medical teams put out content, right? You've probably seen those fun ads on TV that come from pharma companies. So all of that collateral ends up being reviewed through medical, legal, regulatory. In the pharma world, especially with GenAI hype, there's been a lot of excitement around applying GenAI to review of that collateral material. But the thing to really consider there is the risk of a decision being made by AI on something like a review process, which is highly scrutinized by the FDA and folks like the DOJ, that can potentially cause high ramifications if there's a wrong decision. So if, let's say, in this process, right, Gen AI, was to help automate some of the review, but it got it wrong, then it could cost the company, if it's lawsuit, potentially billions of dollars. It's happened before. So, in that framework, I would say Gen AI is a tool that can assist with a human in the loop, which we've all heard the concept of a co-pilot. Like, you definitively want someone to like double verify the work that AI is doing. But more broadly speaking, zooming out, I think one element to consider in applying Gen AI is how risk tolerant is that problem. So if you make a wrong decision, is it going to have high ramifications? If it's not, then I think, Gen AI could be a potential more fully automated solution. So that's one thing I wanted to highlight, because I know, Alex, there was an example too with Hungryroot where the risk factor comes in. And I think it would be good as an example to share that as well.
Oh my God, most definitely. And that's one of the reasons why the core AI that's powering our personalization algorithms is actually not a LLM-based system and not a neural network. It's hard constraints. Just like Vera, in life sciences, there are some errors that are not something that you could allow ever. Similarly, in foods, these things exist. And this is allergies, right? If somebody tells you that they have a peanut allergy, you cannot ever send them anything with peanuts, because this would be life-threatening to them. And as such, a system that cannot guarantee this, and sort of traditional ML without additional guardrails, and LLM-based systems, they cannot guarantee that. It makes that not something that you can use directly. So what we use is actually a combination of operations research system, optimization system that does allow for hard constraints and can ensure things like this as a final layer. And then inputs to this, of course, are traditional ML inputs. So I guess all of that is to say that if you understand the pros and cons here, and you're able to kind of very precisely talk about these remaining 10% that the ChatGPT demo does not solve, you actually have a shot at building a system that will solve the customer's problem. And if instead you're like, 90% of the problem is solved, let me move on, that's great, that's a solved issue, the remaining 10% will eat your lunch. And I think I'm hearing you, Vera, that it is as true in life sciences as it is in food. Is that right?
I think when it comes to risk and assessing risk, because pharma is so regulated, that part is just so critical. Whereas perhaps in other industries, it might be less so. One thing also I just wanted to add, because I know we've had this discussion around risk. Two cases that I've seen, at least in our area, where about how to think about which problems Gen AI is good to apply for outside of kind of the risk framework. It's kind of two. Obviously, everyone knows content generation, which I think can be applied outside of pharma. In pharma, you have to have everything proved by evidence. Generally, that's communicated. So I think content generation is not really as much of a solid use case in pharma as it is in other industries. But I think the second kind of problem specification where Gen AI can be applied, but is not oftentimes talked about, is analysis. So if you all are are probably at a high level familiar with this concept of encoder and decoder type of models. And just for 20 seconds, I'll just explain them in very layman terms. But decoder models, effectively, you can think of them as decoding or generating. So the OG GPT, not the one that exists today, was a decoder model. Encoder models are good at, quote, encoding or analyzing. So when we think about life sciences, for example, where you have to review publications, right, or review field medical or CRM notes, all of that data is unstructured and it's text-based. So encoder models are really a great application for a way to analyze and process unstructured data and give it structure, which then enables these teams to be able to actually analyze that data. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that as like these are the characteristics of problems that you can look for where GenAI as a hammer could be a potential fit. But to tie back to Alex with what you're saying, that risk factor is also important to consider depending on what type of problem you're solving.
I love this. This analytical aspect of this is not spoken about remotely enough. Everybody obsesses over generation and kind of this very direct chatbot prompt experience that obviously is so consumer friendly, but that's not all this technology can do. And I'm very much with you. The analysis piece is incredibly valuable, especially if afterwards that analysis can be something that a human, an expert, reviews and uses that as a co-pilot, as an assistant. Super cool.
And I'm curious, Alex, on on your front, are there ways that you all have experimented with Gen AI at Hungryroot? If you can share that, and do you have any sort of perspectives on frameworks for what type of problems in e-commerce Gen AI could be a good hammer to use?
Yeah. As a context, so we get to know the consumer by asking them structured questions, both during sign up and after they sign up, they keep interacting with us, telling us what they like and what they dislike. And these explicit data inputs really help us understand what to put into their cart. That is as classical of an AI model as it gets, right? So we use a whole bunch of traditional AI, right? So ML and OR. We have been, and it's a perfect fit for that problem set because structured data is analyzed extremely well with these tools, and you can make excellent inferences from that data using those classical AI tools. But exactly to your point, we see opportunity in generative AI as well. And some of these have to do with natural interaction with consumer. So we generate carts every week for our subscribers. And those carts are collections of recipes and groceries that we think they're going to like. And our customers sometimes edit those carts. And one way we think that would be super user-friendly to do so, we've been experimenting with this, is this idea of effectively a back and forth interface where we will send you some recipes for the week and you can reply back in a text message and say, hey, this salad is nice, but it's kind of cold outside. So can I have a more hearty meal to warm up on a cold winter night? And what that would do, obviously, is then regenerate some of the suggestions that are within your cart where the LLM model would be an interface to convert a natural text interaction to an inquiry back into a traditional AI model. We think that that's another mode that's super friendly, easy to use, and a nice augmentation to what we do now. But I can't fathom ChatGPT being a replacement for something like this. Instead, only an augment.
And it almost seems like too with the example that you shared, and I think another maybe ticker or point to add to when can Gen AI be, for what type of problems can Gen AI be a solution? There is an interface point to be made here from a design perspective where now folks with Hungryroot can ask in a more natural language way and interact with the back end quote of Hungryroot that is more structured. And the way that actually a very similar example applies with what we do is we're currently exploring the ability for folks to be able to, in a natural language way, to query and do analysis. So they don't have to be a data scientist, right, and write SQL queries, but rather we can take the questions, which tend to be very medically oriented. So we can fine tune or train LLMs to understand more medical oriented analysis type of questions. But then that ultimately gets translated into, right, a SQL query or into traditional AI models. So potentially considering a chat, not even a chat, but more of a natural language medium as an interface. So if that's relevant to solving a problem, then GenAI could be a potential middleware to enable that type of interface.
Insanely cool. Insanely cool. I love this. And I'm so glad that we now are kind of past this stage where we think that this hammer can just, through its direct application, solve all of the humanity's problems. And instead, we do things like what you just described, this idea that it can be an interface working with some other things that are better at these specific tasks, like SQL is a great way of doing structured data exploration. Or retrieval assisted generation, RAG, right? Where you can do constraints a little bit better. This to me is the true promise of what GenAI can offer. And the faster we jump on these kind of combined systems, whether in e-com or in life sciences, I think the more value will be created.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think it's a tool in a toolbox of all of the existing tech tools we have. And I'll keep iterating this again. It always comes back to what is the customer pain point and problem that you're solving, and mapping that out, which I actually feel like leads into this slide, Alex.
Oh my God, this is the best segue indeed. Vera, like you said in the beginning of our session, if there's one takeaway, it's understand the customer pain. And the only way to do so, I think, is just to spend a bunch of time with your customers. If instead you spend a bunch of time learning the technology and kind of imagining how that technology can be used in different domains, you really won't build anything useful. Uh, and I think kind of this premise applies to any tech and any startup and any new meaningful initiative. I find that with Hungryroot, the only way to create a better product is to spend time with customers, and then afterwards, AI might be a solution, or it might not be, or it might be the expansion of the kinds of products that we carry. Right? We, by the nature of my job, I spend so much time engaging with customers and understanding their feedback, reading our Facebook group, analyzing our research studies, and trying to grasp what it is we can do to have their pains go away. And we recently discovered that one thing that they expect from us is to be able to solve a bigger set of food-related and health-related problems. So what we ended up doing was launching a whole bunch of new categories of things that you can buy from us. For example, kids snacks or vitamins, as we get to learn that moms are looking for effectively a more holistic solution to their problem. And yes, AI helps with that. Because AI kind of is able to make recommendations about the kinds of products that we should put into your cart. But if Hungryroot does not carry vitamins, AI does not help. AI can't put vitamins into your cart if we don't carry vitamins. So in some way, this big discovery was, hey, we should probably be selling vitamins and kids snacks and kids meals. And then AI can do a good job. But if we didn't spend time with customers, there's no way we would have found that out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like focusing customers always at the forefront. And one example that I have, I feel like in life sciences that highlights this as well, is that going back to this marketing example, right? Pharma is very regulated, and there's been a lot of hype around using GenAI for this process of reviewing marketing collateral against regulations, clinical evidence, to ensure that it is up to regulatory, legal, and medical standards. But as we originally had explored that problem, but then as we spent more time with customers who were excited about this premise, we effectively realized that Gen AI is, or any AI, would really be a band-aid to what ultimately is more of a process problem in the way that a lot of these companies have these review processes structured. And we're basically, sure, you can create an AI tool, but it wouldn't really be delivering the value when it really just was an organizational change in a way that needed to happen. And had we not done that, right? Like, let's say, had we not talked to customers and not really understood that and just followed the hype of, build a Gen AI, marketing material review tool, it probably would have sold some contracts, but I guarantee you, like 2-3 years from now, it wouldn't have really made it anywhere. And I still like fundamentally believe that because it's a band-aid, not solving a core root problem.
Fascinating. And let me guess, I bet you hear of a ton of attempts to just straight up use ChatGPT to solve problems in the medical field, don't you?
Yes, so a lot of too what we saw end of last year, and I'm sure it's continued into this year, is a lot of pharma and med device companies have innovation teams or IT teams, and because of the general excitement about Gen AI, I think everyone was like, "Oh, Gen AI can solve all of my problems. Like ChatGPT, like can magically process all of my medical notes and automatically without me doing anything outside of just talking to it, give me accurate results." And I think what we have seen with these teams experimenting is that that is not the case, and there's so much more that you have to one, build out from a technical side, but two, I think also fundamentally understand that problem and then figure out how to piece the right tools, whether it's standard AI or it's general code and automation, whether it is Gen AI, together to get you that ultimate end outcome that everyone's seeking.
I love this. And I think your story is underscoring a big belief that I hold real close to my heart, kind of this idea of a minimum desirable product, which is not the same thing as a minimum viable product. A minimum desirable product is something that actually solves somebody's pain, something that they want. Maybe it's not a lot of people, and maybe it's hacky as heck, but they want it. Um, and a minimum viable product is just a very cool demo that solves 80% of the problem, but nobody really wants to use again. Kind of like ChatGPT for dinner planning. I don't know how many of you tried when it initially came out. I don't think a lot of people are using it for meal planning anymore. But it demos well, does it?
Yes, and I think ultimately, this could probably be a whole other session to discussing like tactically how do you define a minimum desirable product. And I think just the one comment I'll have here, and it have to be high level because I know we're we want to get to the Q&A, is that ultimately it's going to be up to the team to define that, which is probably like, yeah, duh, that's like a very obvious answer. But having a deep understanding of the customer pain point and prioritizing like where is the pain like the most maximally felt, and
Yep.
whatever KPI almost you could establish around we've solved that maximal pain or reduced it, should probably be a key part of defining what success looks like in a minimum desirable product versus like a minimum viable product. You could argue perhaps maybe depending how you define it, they're similar, but I almost view an MVP as like a demo or like a prototype. And that doesn't, I think, fully encompass the outcome to the customer at a minimum that needs to be achieved.
I love this. To me, the key characteristic is there somebody who would pay for this, even if it's clunky? And even if it's only one person in the world, but that thing that you built, that minimum desirable product is so good comparing to their current baseline that might be too expensive or to really do this, or it's so manual, like your story with medical affairs, that they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, and your thing, even though it's not perfect, but oh my God, it does it so much better. So to me, kind of that's the sweet spot of the minimum desirable product.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm super excited to dig into the Q&A. Should we do that?
Let's do that.
Okay, awesome. Let's see. I Okay, so it seems like there are some questions around labeling. So I'm just going to read this and then we'll work through it. As a PM for an online solution serving photographers, we struggle to accurately understand our users' photography types. Currently, we rely on user-selected categories during onboarding and content uploads. However, users may not prioritize accuracy, and there's variation in terminology. Could AI assist in addressing some of these challenges? So I'm curious, Alex, I feel like this could be a good question for you because you guys have an onboarding process where folks select things like diet and the type of food that they're interested in consuming.
Yeah, most definitely. I think there's a couple of routes here. One of them is to force a specific structure on your customers. That is, do some recognition of what's inside the photos and give them structured recommendations to confirm or deny whether that thing that your AI recognized is in the picture, kind of a human in the loop approach that Vera, you were talking about. That might be approach number one. If you can't engage your customers in this, you could then do an mTurk-like thing in order to generate enough labels so that your AI system could be a little bit more precise. That's how I would approach this. But yes, this could be something that AI does, provided that it has enough data to do a good job.
And to add to that, just there were a couple of comments under this question to Robert's comment around enabling the accuracy. And to Alex's point, I do think in terms of scaling, kind of labeling, you do need a human in the loop. And the best way that we have approached it on our end in terms of at least labeling for training or fine tuning our models is you just have to have really good SOPs in place and the right people labeling, and you just have to refine them. I think the reality is like it's hard to get to 100%, quote accuracy, because accuracy it can be subjective depending on what category or vertical you're focused on. So really, I think it's just do your best on creating an SOP and then see how folks label or how your user base labels, and then just continue refining that as you go along and get to whatever minimum bar of accuracy you feel like is good for your product. I don't think there's like a shortcut, like magic wand here, unfortunately.
And Vera, I'm inspired by your approach to kind of reduce the level of risk involved, right? If suddenly having a small mistake in categorization is not devastating in the user experience, because the user experience is forgiving enough for it, then you can slowly learn. You don't need to be at 100% accuracy either.
Right. And one thing too that we've started to implement on our end as well is, one of the things that we have to do is parse out data from publications or FDA prescribing information documents like PDFs, right? And depending on what that data is being used for, the accuracy matters. Like if you have a table of adverse events and different percentages, like you should be extracting what's in that table. And as we know, LLMs can hallucinate, right? So you need to be able to control and ensure accuracy of the data extracted. So what we've also done is started to implement a confidence score for each of the values extracted. So effectively, how confidently do we feel like this value was actually extracted accurately? And then eventually it can be validated by a human, but I think at least it gives transparency at scale, because you can have humans in the loop for a small set, or if you have a ton of money to spend, you could probably process 1 million documents just with humans. But if you're trying to like fully automate data extraction at scale, it's humans aren't not 100% accurate. AI models certainly might not be 100% accurate. So can you at least enable some sort of confidence score that enables transparency around whether we believe this value was accurately extracted? That's just another kind of framework in how to manage expectations in a way when it comes to accuracy.
I love this. I love this, Vera. Let's maybe take another question, and this one is right up your alley. Around thoughts around privacy and security when it comes to using external AI tools. Many companies have regulations that don't allow employees to share even not very sensitive company information with AI products. I'm guessing you see that with your customers a bunch.
Yes, and this is how risk management for GenAI. Yeah, so I think privacy, risk, and compliance is a very broad category, and there's kind of subsectors to that. So I'll kind of tackle a couple that I see in pharma and med device. So I think one, these companies can have internal like ChatGPT enterprise subscriptions, and they do have internal policies where you can just pipe in patient information right into a ChatGPT model, which I think poses challenges for teams internally to be able to fully leverage a lot of these models. The way that we tackle it is we do open source. We don't use GPT. We have only open source. We train them in-house. We can deploy on-prem, so there's full control of the data flow and full transparency. And I think that is absolutely critical for companies that are heavily regulated and where the risk profile and the privacy profile is really high. So GPT could be used in these companies for like simple things, but it's less likely going to be used for critical things. And I think that's the critical stuff is what's most important to the business. So that's where the most value can be created. So I think that's one. Two, risk management in terms of things like the non-deterministic nature or hallucinations would be, I would say, like a confidence score of some sort, or potentially, what Alex, you can speak to this, but like the peanut allergy example, right? Maybe GenAI can be used in the loop for certain parts of the solution, but then you might have more OR or traditional constraints or AI models that can kind of double check that. And then the last thing I'll say on that is, I think, and what I've seen in life sciences is I feel like there's this kind of like subconscious expectation that AI somehow is going to be 100% accurate. And I think what people forget is that humans are not 100% accurate. So like for the marketing collateral review, people make mistakes in that cost companies billions of dollars. So like, I think defining like what is like the minimum threshold for which if AI is 0.1% better than a human, that's probably already good enough. And it doesn't have to be 100% accurate. So those are kind of my general thoughts. And Alex, curious to hear your perspective as well.
I love it, and I won't dare to add more because you are the true expert here.
Oh, well, thank you.
Let's take another.
Okay, great. Let me see some of the. So what challenges have you faced moving from experimentation to scaling in production? I feel like that's a very broad question, and it really probably depends on your product. From a technical perspective of scaling production-wise LLMs, I think that the biggest blocker is typically the ability to process a lot of data at scale, and enabling it's just really expensive. So I think that it becomes then about really optimizing how you're doing inference on the technical front. If that's kind of where the question was headed. I think on the more product side, scaling to production, it's really about just similar to scaling any product, which would be what feedback are you getting from customers, right? And then how are you integrating that into more of the interface of the product. And oftentimes there'll be new things at scale that will pop up that you probably just didn't imagine would have, in experimentation. And there's this funny like meme. I wish I could pull it up. But it talks about how like a QA engineer like enters a bar and it's like, tries 1, tries 9999, tries like XYZ, and then everything's working just fine. And then like customer walks into the bar, turns left, goes to the bathroom, and the bar explodes. It's like whenever you like launch things into production, you're going to have people using the product in ways that you never thought they would. So I think that's just something you're not going to know until you start scaling in production, and then you just try to address it the best that you can.
And I think that's where minimum desirable product really comes into play, because if you have one customer that loves your product so much that they're using it and paying you a tiny little bit for it, you're going to discover their way of using the bar.
Exactly. You will know for sure. Let's see. So how do you look at OpenAI and other similar platforms from the perspective of business risk? What are your
Are you
thoughts?
afraid of ChatGPT eating your lunch, Vera?
No. I am not. I'm glad. I mean, honestly, I'm very grateful for ChatGPT because of the hype they've created, because it's created a change in a regulated industry to want to adopt the technology. But I think it's not ChatGPT, like we are having a discussion itself, is not enough of a tool to solve core problems. It has to be in combination with other things.
And I am not either, because of the things that we discussed before. It solves 80% of the problem, but the remaining 20% are so important, and it is terrible at it.
Yes, in regulated industries, especially.
I see one really awesome question that I thought we could take. What are your thoughts on human in the loop being a true expert in the domain, like a dietitian, or user experience as a result, as a recipe, as in customers voting on recipes? Ultimately, I think risk is the way you evaluate how much of a human in the loop you involve. That is, in some way, if you put something in front of your customers as an output that they are supposed to consume in some way, like in our case, literally eat the food, you need to know how bad a mistake would be, and would somebody be terribly hurt, or would they just get a recommendation that they don't love? In our situation, we put recommendations into the customer's cards, and they don't take us up on it 1/3 of the time. That is, we put something into their cart and they say, no, I actually don't want that, I want something else. So we sometimes are wrong. I think we could be wrong less, but if we're wrong sometimes, it's not a disaster, because our customers still review their cards and give us some feedback as a result of those actions. So in some way, me being wrong in this way, as long as I didn't send anybody peanuts who has a peanut allergy, is totally okay. Vera, in your case, I'm guessing it's a little bit different.
No, I mean, I think your assessment of risk is exactly the thing to focus on. It's what is the consequence if the decision is wrongly made by AI. And in life sciences, going back to the examples from our discussion, in marketing collateral review, if the decision made by AI is wrong, the consequences are extremely high. And because pharma is so specialized, you need experts in the loop to validate what the AI is doing. You need medical experts, you need legal experts, and regulatory experts involved in that process. But on the flip side, the example that I used for like the data extraction, if you're looking at tables, right, and you're trying to extract the values for adverse events, well, you don't need an expert to be able to determine whether the value in the PDF matches the extracted value, right? So that, that I think you can have anyone in theory that's a human in the loop. So agree, to the point that you made, Alex, on that.
I love this. And I mean, in some way, there's also a point in between, right? On one side, there's an extremely high risk, and you need to have an expert who's evaluating the output of AI to make sure that nothing makes it through. On the other end, you effectively use user reactions as a way to calibrate your system. But there are solutions somewhere in the middle where you're auditing some of the output, and that your experts are providing some feedback back into the system by effectively manually tagging some of the outputs as a way of training the system. This can also be a way for you to judge yourself how good the outputs are. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do it for every single output in that case, but you can do it for a subset. And I know that technique is quite powerful and can be used at large-scale systems like search engines, for example.
Yeah, that's a great point. And to Caitlin's comment, I just saw to this discussion, I think it was for question as well, around sometimes when the user is wrong, it could be that their perception is the response they received is wrong, and it provides some insight on maybe how we have to improve or enhance that experience to support the user's understanding. So I think with the human in the loop there, like there could also be, if the user is misinterpreting, like if the results are accurate, perhaps, but the user might be unintentionally misinterpreting, it could be more of a design challenge. So then it's less about the accuracy or human in the loop in ensuring the accuracy of the response, but more, are you communicating the results in a way that the user, in the intended way for the user to interpret how you originally intended. So I think that's a good point too.
Makes sense.
So
Makes
let's
sense.
see. Um, mm, so with this one, what are your thoughts on training versus evaluation and products that focus on one or the other or both? What are limitations of training? Caitlin, I don't know if you're still in here, but would you be open to clarifying a little bit of what you mean here? Is it that like whether or not products use custom models and how valuable that is?
Yeah, and thank you both so much. This has been helpful. It sounds like the data infrastructure for that analysis and evaluation is valuable. And so, if there's an approach to creating that infrastructure for evaluation, would that be like the first step? And then what more does it take to get to the training step? And are there more privacy or legal or other considerations before you can get there?
I think it's like the first, or if I'm kind of understanding the context and the question, the way that I look at it in the context of like Atrix, the product, as a tangible example is, first determining whether having specialization in a model delivers value to solve the problem.
Mhm.
In our case, it does because, when you're looking at medical language, different therapy areas like oncology, or even within that, like small, lung cancer versus other prostate cancer or other forms of cancer, to diabetes, to cardiovascular, to, Ozempic and weight loss. So whatever it is that you're covering, they all have very different languages, and analysis, the accuracy of analysis is important. So for us, it's worth investing into fine tuning versus training. That's like a whole, I feel like, other discussion, but at least fine tuning a lot of these models to different therapeutic areas to increase accuracy. And then the way that we would evaluate that is you do need an expert in that therapeutic space, right? I think to take a trained model, you run it, like use your standard evaluation techniques for AI models, run it through and have an expert validate how the model is performing. But that's because pharma and medical language is very technical, so you do need that. But I think the core of it is determining what is the additional value that's going to be provided by you doing the fine tuning, and how critical is that?
So there is a difference between fine tuning and training a model. And a training model would be taking it a step further and would be much more in depth, kind of like the scaling that you were talking about, maybe even using some data sources that you would have to get approval for, type of thing.
Yeah, so fine tuning is almost like it's like if the model was 90% set and you wanted to have like a 10% of personalization on top of that model, that's fine tuning. And if you use OpenAI, like they let you fine tune, that's what they're doing. They're not doing like a full end-to-end training. And most of the time, probably for most cases, you can just get away with fine tuning. It's also much more cost effective. With training, you're literally taking a model and training it from like 0% almost, and heavily personalizing it. I think in those cases, at least on our end, where I would consider doing a full training, would be if how do I just if the interface or the way that I wanted to interact with that model is so heavily different, that would likely require a full training. But also a full training is, depending on your model size, can cost you tens of millions to hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's like, is that cost, worth again the ROI you're going to get out of it? In most cases, I think fine tuning will solve like 90% of the problems, but for very specific problems, you might, want to do full training. It's just really expensive.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Vera. Guys, we are coming up to the hour. Thank you so very much for tuning in. Thank you for super thoughtful questions. Vera, thank you so much. I learned so much from you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, as well. It's super fascinating to get a purview, working in regulated pharma, to get a purview into e-commerce. And thank you, Eleanor, for being a wonderful host. And thank you, everyone, for great questions.